One of the things that both seasoned and rookie air traffic controllers do is constantly perfect their scan as they move their eyes across the radar display from target to target, aircraft to aircraft. All the information in the data block corroborates with the mental picture the air traffic controller has in their head, and it jives with other information, cross-referenced with flight progress strips or EDST entries. Very interesting stuff. And it's interesting because a lot of it, with the help of being trained in this art, but a lot of it is self-developed where you find something that works for you and you go with it in hopes that you will consistently apply your standard as you make your way through your career. It's really exciting because it's a very fun thing to teach as well, to see people find a pattern and take flight, no pun intended, as they make their way through various sessions or training scenarios. Now this presentation is called Scanning for Fun because indeed it is fun. It's the most lucrative fun there is in all of air traffic. And what makes this information that is going to be presented to you today useful is that we will examine some things in the 7110.65 that kind of allude to helping you make controlled decisions based upon the results of your scanning, the fruits of your labor. Whenever you scan for something and you find a conflict, we will help you out saying, hey, this is what you have to do to make it better, to make it right, to ensure positive separation. So it's helping you complete the picture. It's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. You're there, you're looking, and most of the time everything makes perfect sense. Everything looks good and aircraft aren't in conflict. And it's up to you to either say hi and bye, climb or descend, cross this fix, maybe adjust the speed here, maybe turn right, turn left. But whenever you come across an opportunity to say, oh wow, I found a potential conflict, let me fix it. So let's bridge the gap. Let's reward you for what you found when you were scanning for conflicts, and with proper phraseology and good technique and guidance from the 7110.65, let's complete that picture. Really excited that you're here today. Can't wait to get started. See you at the next slide. One of the unsung hero chapters of the .65 has to be chapter 2. It is often overlooked because the user is going to a chapter that is more pertinent to the question that they have raised. Say if you're a tower controller, chances are you're going to spend most of your time in chapter 3. Radar controllers or controllers who primarily use radar are going to find themselves in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Non-radar operations, maybe your facility has a lot of non-radar airspace, chapter 6 is for you. And if you control over the water, if you're an oceanic facility, chapter 8 is where you're going to get a lot of your guidance. But chapter 2 is so fundamental. It provides the basis for the language that we speak. It's what pilots are expecting to hear when we say call signs and use numbers or report things of value such as time, altitude, altimeter settings. All those wonderful things are here in chapter 2. It also is the bedrock of how the air traffic control system works. And we often don't concern ourselves with it because we are operating under normal or nominal conditions when everything is working. All the wonderful things that are happening in the background, flight data, flight progress data is being shared between facilities. If that's all taking place, we don't concern ourselves with relaying flight information or talking to flight service stations or manually passing information to adjacent sectors and stuff like that because all of it is shared. But it does in fact provide that information. So in the event that we were to lose all of our sophisticated and fancy bells and whistles, we can still do our job. And that's what I like about it so much. I could probably devote a whole video to my love affair with chapter 2, but we don't have time for that. But what we do have time for is 231 procedural preference. We won't read the entire paragraph because this little bit of information ties in exactly to what we were talking about in the introductory slide about that Easter egg situation where you have come across the conflict, your eyes have met two targets that are in conflict, two aircraft that are in conflict, and you found and recognized the conflict. That's great because that is very important. That's basically the job description. We are looking for those conflicts and now we need to get into the resolving stage of it. So how can we resolve it and make it sound good and be in line with the guidance outlined in the .65? Well, that's what we're going to cover in these next couple slides, and then the plan is to actually apply it to a miniature session. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to getting that. But first things first, procedural preference, subparagraph D in particular, says, use non-radar separation in preference to radar separation when the situation dictates that an operational advantage will be gained. Note. Now remember, notes in and of themselves are not policy or guidance. They are statements of fact that maybe emphasize what you previously read or help to clear it up ever so slightly. One situation may be where vertical separation would preclude excessive vectoring. Okay, that is awesome guidance in and of itself, because a lot of the situations that we come across whenever aircraft are in conflict can easily be solved, at least in the en route environment, by altitude separation. 1,000 feet is certainly a smaller distance than either 3 miles or 5 miles of any kind of lateral separation that you're looking to achieve. We could certainly agree there. So this is a point, but you're probably wondering, why is it here? Well, one, we're talking about how in chapter 2 outlines how we can do this job without any fancy bells and whistles, inclusive of radar. And even though we oftentimes work with mode C derived information from the aircraft, right, the altimeter, and we are getting that information from the transponder, right? The radar signal, secondary radar goes out, it comes back, we get a whole bunch of information other than just position, but we get some altitude data in there. And we often think that that is purely a function of radar, which it is, because chapter 5 radar contains a whole bunch of information about mode C verification and verify assigned altitude and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, we can forego radar and still get altitude information. We can get pilot reported altitude. So it's interesting how it fits here, and it's fun to make that distinction. But it's very poignant, because at the end of the day, stop an aircraft's climb or stop their descent and you have solved the conflict. So maybe that is something that we will be able to do here. And in your instance, you'll be using a lot of flight progress strips as opposed to EDST entries. So it is key to always ensure that whatever you have on the strip matches whatever is on the data block. Now, if you're not at a facility that uses strips, you're one of the lucky ones. Your EDST will take care of that. And oftentimes it is always syncing up to what's on the radar display. But there is a certain amount of muscle memory involved, and it is very useful. And it is interesting to note that procedural preference and thinking of altitude separation as a function of being non-radar, as a function of non-radar, is very important. And it will do you some good as you make your way through the process. So, happy we were able to cover that. Let's move on to the next slide and talk about some other techniques and tools that you'll have in your tool belt. And before we get to those tools, let's just stay within chapter 2 just for one additional section. Further down the chapter, keeping in line with the fundamental aspect, the game plan, if you will, of air traffic control that chapter 2 really does contain, is team position responsibilities in 2.10.1, because again, today's topic is scanning with a purpose. And this is where we get those marching orders from. Scanning doesn't occur too often. The actual verb, the actual word, and its variations do not actually occur that often in the 7110, a couple times in chapter 3, but a couple times here in chapter 2 whenever we talk about team position responsibilities to the kind of facility, the kind of equipment you're using. And it's worth noting that the radar position clearly defines what you should do with respect to scanning. Scan radar display, correlate with flight progress strip information or EDST data as applicable. So we do in fact have guidance. We have marching orders from .65 saying our duty is to ensure that when we are seated at the radar position, we are the ones who are making sure that we are scanning for conflicts and just monitoring everything that is going on, moving in a pattern a controller defined pattern, whatever works for you. This is where it's open to your creative license. It's open to technique on how you are going to fulfill your obligation to scan everything. And not only are you scanning data blocks, you're scanning limited data blocks. You're scanning weather. You're scanning any kind of mode C intruders, any kind of aircraft, primary radar returns. You're looking at everything and trying to make your decisions based upon that. So before we jump into the actual procedures, the actual guidance and the tools that we're going to arm you with as we make our way through this particular presentation, it is prudent to be reminded not only of one aspect that we learned in the previous slide about chapter 2 and the relationship of procedural preference with whether we have radar or not, or what constitutes radar or not, but also it is important to realize that it is one of our responsibilities as an R side controller when you sign into that R position that you will be scanning the radar display and correlating it with a different additional information that is housed at the sector. So happy we got to cover that. Just a little asterisk, a shameless plug to scanning because that is the name of the presentation. And now let's get into the fun part. See you there. Now that we've established that vertical separation is a form of non-radar separation, and I think we kind of agreed that it is a more efficient use of airspace to stop an aircraft vertically 1,000 feet than to try to finagle some kind of lateral separation, whether you're going for 3 or 5 miles. It makes everybody happier too because it's less movement of the aircraft, so you know that the flight crew is probably going to be more apt to accept and be happy with a vertical situation as opposed to kind of being vectored off into the wild blue yonder and then turned back once the conflict is resolved. So we have identified the conflict and we would like to use altitude. How can we resolve it? Well, you can find your way to chapter 4 in detail, chapter 4, 5, 7 in further detail, the subparagraph F, because this chapter or this section is very large. It's an umbrella section with plenty of phraseology examples to cover almost every conceivable situation, or it allows for very creative ways to control aircraft vertically. But if you find your way all the way down the subparagraph F, we will discuss kind of what we're going to get into. But it's worth a whole read because there's a lot of good examples there and lots of tools in the toolbox to help you resolve conflicts or to make efficient use of your airspace. But F says, when the pilot's discretion portion of a climb descent clearance is being canceled by assigning a new altitude, inform the pilot the new altitude is an amended altitude. Example, American 83, amend altitude, descend and maintain flight level 260. Now, there are some subtleties here that we have to kind of make a little bit of a distinction. Whenever you climb an aircraft, say out of San Juan on the Oconee, and you're going to climb, say, ABEX A45, San Juan Center, climb and maintain flight level 340. I think we could both agree that nowhere did anybody say pilot's discretion, nor is it a pilot's discretion. The aircraft in question, likely a Boeing 767, is going to climb at a rate that we would expect a Boeing 767, a cargo Boeing 767, to climb at. Probably somewhere around 3,000 feet a minute, at least up till flight level 200, and then maybe they'll start easing off and pulling it back to, say, maybe 1,500 feet per minute or something like that. But at no point in time did we ever really say, hey, this is a pilot's, climb at pilot's discretion, maintain flight level 340. Same thing with the descent. Descent and maintain, very simple. Descend at pilot's discretion, unless you're specifically wanting them or giving the aircraft the freedom to descend at whatever rate they'd like, however minuscule, you usually omit that phraseology. Now, where is it applicable? And we use this instance a lot, are crossing restrictions. Not on SIDS or stars. Well, there's some subtleties there that we won't get into because we're not necessarily talking about SIDS and stars at the moment, but crossing restrictions, straight up crossing restrictions for Beano or Sailor, Vetus or Joshi, those are implied to be pilot's discretion because whenever you say cross Beano at maintain 1000 at 250 knots, that aircraft is going to comply with that restriction. You, the air traffic controller, don't really care. You scanned, you saw that they were ready for their descent. The descent looked good. It was clear and smooth skies all the way down from their cruising altitude to 11,000, and you want them to be at 250 knots as per the SOP. You don't care how they get there. They can descend at 3,000 feet a minute, or they can descend at 500 feet a minute, just as long as they get there. And they read it back, and that's kind of confirmation that they are, in fact, going to do so. You set up a contract with the aircraft, and they will comply. So you really don't care. So this paragraph, despite the fact that we don't always explicitly say pilot's discretion, is still good practice for those instances, or if you are trying to amend a crossing restriction or stop the crossing restriction for an intermediate altitude because of traffic, which we're talking about here. And that would be a perfect situation where you would use amend altitude. And oftentimes we just do it all the time as a matter of fact. Anytime that we scan and we take a look, we continue our scan because that is the whole model and kind of keystone aspect, cornerstone of scanning is that you're constantly doing it and making sure that everything is as expected. And when something comes up and you say, oh, okay, I realize that I need to stop that aircraft 2,000 feet below an aircraft possibly transitioning from left to right, you amend altitude, and there it is. So it's a very important part of the .65 and a great chapter, and certainly the entire section is certainly worth a read. But now we kind of understand that we can stop aircraft, stop their climb, stop their descent, and insert a little phraseology. The amend altitude perks the ears up of the pilot and letting them know that, hey, not only am I giving you an additional altitude clearance, but it's amended, so be prepared for a different number than what I might have originally given to you a couple minutes beforehand. Very useful. Put it in your repertoire. A great tool for the toolbox. We'll talk about some other things in the succeeding slide. I will see you there. Now, in the circumstances where vertical separation or amending an aircraft's altitude will not do the trick, will not be sufficient or even appropriate, we certainly have Chapter 5, radar, and we have vectoring at our disposal, which is very exciting because vectoring is a good skill to have. Sometimes it is appropriate or a lot more useful to vector an aircraft out of the way. And especially when we start talking about speeds and overtakes and stuff like that, maybe it's better to give a little turn and to bypass traffic. Like switching lanes in a car whenever you're on the highway. Use the passing lane. It can be very fruitful. And the 7110.65 in this section has a lot of useful information. Again, we're kind of cherry picking here, but it's all good information, and there's a lot of good phraseology in there as well. But we vector aircraft, to keep it short, in controlled airspace for separation, bingo, safety, noise abatement, operational advantage, confidence maneuver, or when a pilot requests. And we won't get too far into this, back into our good old beloved airspace conversations, airspace classification or designation, but in Class G airspace only upon pilot request as an additional service. So just remember, if you are torn between multiple requests at one time, and an aircraft is going to ask for a vector in Class G airspace, just remember it's not high on your priority list. Just figured I'd throw in that little caveat there. But the actual statement A is very self-explanatory. We're going to use vectoring, move aircraft out of the way of each other for separation, safety. Those two kind of go hand in hand. Noise abatement, if you're avoiding areas, densely populated areas at night where you have to miss that area with a very loud aircraft. Operational advantage, again, there it is. We're bringing up that where perhaps an altitude separation, an amended altitude was not the most appropriate way to do it or not advantageous to us or the pilot. You can offer a radar vector. Confidence maneuver, you could use that as well. Not too much of that being used or examples to actually illustrate, but it's there. And certainly aircraft can request it. Say a lot of aircraft sometimes, because of wake turbulence, they don't want to be minimally separated from an aircraft at 1,000 feet because you're going to give emerging target procedure if they're turbojet involved, or if they're aircraft above 10,000 feet, or presidential aircraft regardless of altitude. So you're certainly going to have other responsibilities if you're using the minimum separation, and sometimes it's something that they don't want to do. Or perhaps they are in trail and they're kind of stuck behind another aircraft that's generating some wake turbulence. Maybe they just would like to offset to the side or request a vector until they can get past it, something like that. So it's very useful. So we understand that there are instances where vectoring might be more appropriate than vertical separation, but now we are talking about two wonderful tools to use as we make our way into the actual scenario. This is the exciting part, what's going to take place on the next slide. So let's go there with these past slides and the lessons learned in mind. As you see, we've arrived at the sector. It's not one particular dedicated sector. We have most of the en route area in SAM 1 visible to us, with the predominant portion of Sector 6 being visible, part of Sector 4, which is so awfully large, the eastern part of Sector 2 and the northern part of Sector 8. You also notice that we have all of our tear-off menus or display areas being shown. We have a nice little clock there for you to kind of show you what kind of time amounts we're dealing with here for your overall situational awareness. We have the altimeters, just in the event that we give a crossing restriction for fun. We have the separation list pulled up because that's a decision support tool that we can use to see how long we have aircrafts on vectors to get a continuous data readout between two aircraft. In the event the conflict alert goes off, we will have it there to show the aircraft pair in question. I mean, it won't be obvious in the data block as well. The preview area to show what we're typing in there, both as the RPO and as the controller, as we slew over targets and put in entries. And the display data area, if anything, it's most useful to have the vector length, the last entry there in the display data area, to show you what kind of vector length or how far out the headlights are being pointed. It's really exciting because we are going to use this opportunity as a chalk talk when it relates to scanning. We have not really discussed scanning yet. We've talked about the rules that we are going to use, the guidance that we have from the .65. So we have that taken care of. But those rules, how will we use those rules in effort to resolve conflicts? And we resolve conflicts by continuously scanning for them. So that's how that's going to work out. It's going to be very casual. We're going to keep it very light. And we will talk about examples. Who knows? You might have already seen something that is brewing here. Some of it's meant to be very abundantly clear. It's a very entry-level scenario. But one of the things that we want to focus on, if not our primary focus, is to scan. We want to scan each data block. We want to scan the aircraft type. We want to scan the speed. We want to scan the Mode C readout. We're talking about important dynamic variables that are contained within the data block that is useful to us, the controller, to make a controlled decision to resolve conflicts, if that makes sense. So, without further ado, let's hit play and we'll do some narration. Now you see there, our first conflict there is to see that UPS 9829 is certainly out climbing and much faster than American 1852 climbing on the Oconee. They're on the same SAPO transition, and we need to recognize that. A Boeing 747 is going to outclimb an Airbus A321 every day of the week and twice on Sundays. So let's get on that one, because out of all the conflicts as we sat down, that one is certainly the most imminent. I am sure you recognize others that are taking place, whether they're inbound to the sector or out of view, which you can't see those ones yet. But that one is certainly the most obvious. So let's fix that one. And you see we're going to do that. We're going to give a nice little altitude amendment to the UPS. We're going to make sure that we use Mode C data accordingly and stop the aircraft at 26 and step climate reference American. We're keeping it right for direction of flight in that instance. Our second conflict there is a C-130 overtaking a Beechcraft 1900 on Yankee 290. Fail 33 is a C-130, one of those awesome newer ones. And the Amphitrite is just chugging along in a Beechcraft 1900. You're talking about different aircraft classes too, which kind of give it away, but aircraft characteristics is another thing we scan for. Not only are we just myopically scanning the data block and looking at the aircraft type as more than gee whiz information. We want to scan with a purpose. And the information we're deriving from the aircraft types is going to say, hey, how dire actually is this? So good catch on that one as well. So we can fix this with a little bit of zooming up and just manipulation of the views to really show you what's going on. As you see there, the situation with the UPS and the Americans working out nicely, and we can probably give UPS another altitude, even if it is wrong forward temporarily. We're going to climb the Fail 33 because if we looked at the flight progress strips, we'll see that Fail 33 is not landing anywhere in the terminal area. Looking at another conflict here, we have a couple brewing here over Sailor, and we're also looking at a little conflict on Yankee 355 as no doubt a distraction from Miami Center, a handoff with another instance brewing. And we can be safe to say that those two aircraft aren't even in our airspace yet. But if we look at the speed, we see that JetBlue is a lot faster than Islandways. And there we go again, zooming out, keeping a lot of things in mind there as well. Delta 873 is climbing his level at 34, and Foothills 426 is slowly climbing to 34 as well, and a slightly less speed, quite the overtake of 90 knots. So again, a lot of things to recognize here, and a lot of good work to be done. There's the Caribbean and the 9 Alpha Whiskey. Embraer 145s, no matter how fast they'd like to think they can go or how hard they try, they will not outspeed a 767. And they are getting mighty close. And we see Cargolux is ascending to flight level 310. And we have a very light jet 230 Tango at 33. And they're both landing San Juan, so we're going to solve that situation. Luckily, they're not in conflict yet, but the conflict is a foregone conclusion because they're both desiring to get the Sailor. And look, we're putting somebody in the separation list there. We have 7.5 miles between Niner Alpha Whiskey and Caribbean Airlines 791, and we're going to get to solving this conflict. We're going to move Niner Alpha Whiskey arbitrarily just because we just can pretend that we asked them first and they were able. So boom, that conflict is solved. Overtake situation completely solved. And now let's work on the next situation here. As you see there, we kept UPS 9829 climbing to 28, reference American. That situation's working itself out. And we're going to give a little heading to the number 230 Tango, because we definitely know that no matter how fast they try in the ground speed as they make their way down the Sailor, and they're getting mighty close to that time where they're going to need that restriction. So let's turn them out of the way of the Cargolux and let Cargolux speed right on by. And good. We keep UPS 9829 climbing, reference the American, edge them up ever so slightly. Putting a little halo up there so we can give Cargolux a good heading to circumnavigate, to keep them laterally separated. We see that turn to a slightly offset heading is working out. Cargolux will speed by, and we can also start Cargolux and give them their crossing restriction at Sailor. We're doing our best to solve this situation with the JetBlue giving them direct SLUGO, see if that will achieve some lateral separation offset of the Islandways. Both of these aircraft are on Yankee 355, and we'll see how that goes. JetBlue is not within our airspace, but certainly within the area where we have control for turns from Miami Center. And you see how that's working out between the JetBlue and the Islandways. You can even see, even with a 1 minute vector length, that there is some lateral separation being realized there. Fail 3-3 and Amflight are all clear conflict. UPS is leveling off at 300. American is leaving flight level 330, 334, so we can start stepping up UPS a little bit more as they make their way to Sapo. And probably we would put that at final altitude in for them because it is most appropriate that Miami Center, once the aircraft has been overtaken, that UPS can get the altitude they want. And they're going to slightly different areas. They might be on the same airway for an extended period of time, but American's going to Charlotte, UPS is going to Louisville. They eventually will get some kind of lateral separation down the way. But you've certainly done your job. The overtake situation with Cargolux and the 30 Tango is working out nicely as Cargolux is making their restriction, and we are step descending the 30 Tango reference Cargolux. And a whole bunch of handoffs are being taken by adjacent sectors. Cargolux is keeping their speed up. We send them over to 126.45. And both fail in Amflight 9804 over to 118.15. Easy enough there. And we're starting 30 Tango down, step descending them reference that, and also giving them a heading that's paralleling Cargolux. So it's essentially putting them behind Cargolux at this point, a little bit of an S turn. Keeps them on top of any possible wake turbulence that Cargolux might be generating for such a small aircraft following. But a lot of these conflicts are solved. Delta was able 36 on top of Foothills at 34. A little bit of data block separation, a little overlying text might be necessary here. As you see there, you run out the headlights there, the vector lens, and see that JetBlue and Islandways are no longer in conflict as JetBlue heads direct SLUGO and Islandways remains on the route. Very advantageous using vectoring to your advantage. The Yankee 355 traffic is passing what is either direct Dongku or Yankee 318 traffic there. We're not going to pop the bubble, we're just keeping 30 Tango reference Cargolux. And you can see how fast Cargolux is, looking at the ground speed, and how 30 Tango is just going to fall right behind. You could probably even get away with turning them back on course to Sailor now, but again, if you're just looking to be sure, as you monitor the situation, scanning, moving from target to target, you realize that you could probably scan at least twice of all the aircraft under your jurisdiction and get back to this and turn them back. The nice thing is if you keep them on the heading a little bit longer, you don't really have to worry about if you turn them back too early, and they can maintain any speed and descend down to the altitude that they want. As you see, we're not focusing on any one thing for too long. We're going to move away from that situation. It's materializing nicely, and we have a departure, a HondaJet. And strategically, if not tactically, we see that the HondaJet is on the Oconee. Same thing with FedEx 64, and we have what is probably going to develop into an overtake situation with a HondaJet. No matter how hard they climb, is going to be overtaken by an MD-11. That, my friends, is knowing your aircraft types and knowing what to expect for aircraft as they depart. That initial departure stage, they're full of fuel, full of bags, full of people. Some of these aircraft are just not going to perform the way that you anticipate them to. And reality will be your tutor. And you see how FedEx 64 is building up speed. Chances are they're not full of boxes anymore. You see how our situation between 30 Tangos worked out, and we're going to turn them back direct Sailor. It all worked out there, and kind of like I said, we were able to scan for a couple different items and then make our way back to that one, and that instance, that particular conflict, or that tie, if you will, at Sailor, is solved. We know now that the Eclipse jet behind will never catch up, or we hope never catch up to the Boeing 747. And we still have the halo there. Maybe we didn't take it down yet. In due time. So there it is. One of those things is we can coordinate with R1 and ask them to put FedEx on a heading, which looks like that was the case here. You call R1 and R5, request FedEx 64, heading 350. Essentially, that'll ride the boundary of the sector 4 and 6. One thing you want to watch out for is how many Sailor arrivals you have and how good FedEx is climbing, because if you keep them on too north of heading, then they're head on with your descenders in the San Juan. As you see, they were putting in taking down the halo because we have the distance we needed. Foothills and Delta are superimposed, so good thing we solved that conflict. And we're just checking out what kind of separation we got. Look at that, 7 miles and increasing. Very good. Caribbean is finally overtaking the 9 Alpha Whiskey, so happy we solved that. FedEx is climbing at a good enough rate. They're not quite on a 350 heading, because there's a couple things to consider. Your 2 aircraft that are over Bino that are going to continue eastbound on Yankee 290. But now we're starting to turn the FedEx back, 64 back on a 335 heading, and that'll get them up and over our Sailor arrivals, because they're climbing at such an exorbitant rate, and we use our tools to make that decision. Because if the 30 Tango and Cargolux 62 Victor have to be at Sailor at 11 and 250, we give a little merging target procedure there, traffic for Foothills and Island Ways. Foothills 426, traffic 1 o'clock, 12 miles, opposite direction, Embraer, flight level 330. Island Ways 2581, traffic 1 o'clock, 15 miles northwestbound, CRJ, flight level 340. Worked out there. That lateral separation worked out perfectly, as you see how Island Ways 2581 is coming up on Pling, and JetBlue is direct Slugo. Get rid of our separation list. 9 Alpha Whiskey and Caribbean Line 791 are a perfect area to start their handoff status to Sector 2. Sector 2 takes the handoff. They're excited we solved that problem for them. FedEx 64 is on that 330 heading, that 335 heading, and just perfectly on a separate traffic lane than the HondaJet, who's doing their very best, but sometimes the best isn't good enough. We're looking at these descent rates here and just playing around, making it look realistic in terms of what the RPO would be doing. And just working on that. Little mistake I made was we still have 225 heading in the scratch pad in the 4th line of 30 Tango. I'm not sure if we're going to get around to fixing that, but that's why we scan. And I apologize for being a bad controller, a bad example. Gave the merging target procedure. That was fun. We practiced our phraseology there. Yeah, 36, 33, 34, 33. 33s are lateral. Everybody else is vertical. We gave traffic like we should. The sequence over Sailor is starting to materialize or be abundantly clear even at this extrapolated range. We took a handoff, an aircraft at flight level 250, the KVOC 5032, a turboprop. FedEx is now co-altitude with November 1 Hotel Juliet and now climbing the aircraft. And we take a look at the climb rates. We find no reason why it would not continue to be that way. So we cleared FedEx back on course. They're out climbing them by almost 1,200 feet, and they are just about to have 1,000 foot of constant buffer and increasing over the Honda Jet. So good job there. To recap, we asked R1 and R5 to put FedEx on a 350 heading, treat them like a Glada, get them up and over the slow aircraft by then, turning them counterclockwise, calling their turn slowly back to the northwest. 335 heading will do perfect. It will ride the R1, R6 boundary. Remember to make sure you do your point out. If you're separated, if you're working both R6 and R4, you don't have to worry about that. The entire place is your sandbox to play in. Aha! Miami set us up. A little turboprop going 280 knots across the ground with United 2353 at flight level 250. If you were to see the flight progress up, you see that United is non-RVSM equipped today, and they are outside of an RVSM stratum, and they're a max 8. You look at the data block with a purpose, and you notice a max 8 and an Antonov. Okay, but then the speed will certainly tell the rest of that story if you're not quick to realize the aircraft characteristics. R1's taking the handoff on the Cargolux. Good job with that situation. Everything is working out very nicely in a calmed environment as we continuously scan and we take a look at the key characteristics, focusing on ground speed, aircraft type, using our tools, the separation list, using our halos, using our airspace, using headings, using vectoring, some of the things we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. A little bit of maintenance stuff here I'm doing as the RPO function kind of plays out. See how FedEx is doing a little data block separation there, resisting the temptation to condense the data blocks before they are out of our airspace. It's a very good practice. We waited, maybe got a little overzealous. Do as I say, not as I do. There we go. We got the Eclipse jet there all fixed with SJU. Foothills and Delta are doing just fine. Let's get them handed off to Miami Center. That MSAW warning is false. We don't have to give them the old low altitude alert. November 30 Tango, check your altitude immediately. The San Juan altimeter is 3008, or I even messed that up. Low altitude alert, number 30 Tango, check your altitude immediately. The minimum vectoring altitude in your area is, they're over the water, so it's essentially the 1,000 feet above the surface, but it's a false reply, so we don't have to actually get carried off with that safety alert. Though, an opportunity to practice your phraseology. The FedEx situation worked out wonderfully. FedEx is just over top of the Hotel Juliet, one Hotel Juliet, by over 2,000 feet and 70 knots faster. There we go, getting rid of some data blocks that we don't have to scan for because, as a wise controller once said, get rid of your video deadwood, and that is very much it. The less you have to scan, the more concentration and mental acuity you can apply to aircraft that are under your control. And you see what a vector or a direct, using direct to your advantage does whenever they're still in Sector 63's airspace with the JetBlue and the Island Ways. 50 knots faster, but you have a nice, what is probably a 12 to 15 mile buffer. And giving JetBlue what they probably wanted anyways, as opposed to making them fly the entire length of Yankee 355, stopping at Pling and Callao and onwards to Slugo. Not bad at all. Now, as you see there, one of the instances that we took care of between the KVOC and the United was we reached out to Miami Center and asked for control of KVOC 5032. Miami 62 San Juan Center request control KVOC 5032 to flight level 230. We don't even bother getting into a game of 20 questions. We just know that the aircraft is able lower by the virtue of that aircraft have to land sometime, that it's easier to command them to go lower than it is to get into an inquiry of whether they're actually able or if it's optimal for them to climb. And that situation was taken care of. And that will happen. It's kind of a rather obscene example, but an example nonetheless of sometimes the conflicts will creep up on you. And you see Miami is taking their handoffs on our aircraft bound over Dongku, the foothills in the Delta. FedEx 64 is now over 4,000 feet higher than the 1 Hotel Juliet. We solved the United 2353 in the KVOC 5032 situation, and we also took a departure there. A Spirit Wings 935 climbing on the Glada. Niner Alpha Whiskey and Carolina 791. You see how that overtake was realized, and they're now happy talking to Sector 2. And we have another Glada departure, Iberia 6300, heavy Airbus A350-900. And big surprise there, if you look at the aircraft type, judging by the time of day, the time of year, you know that Spirit Wings 935, as much as we love the Airbus A321, we do give it a little bit of flack, realizing it's not the best climber, especially climbing out of San Juan in the wintertime. Why I say that's because it's full of people, full of their bags and souvenirs. And the Iberia is also chock full of jet fuel because they're transatlantic, but it's a heavy jet, a lot bigger engines, same departure procedure. We're going to use direct to our advantage here. You notice how we have 5 miles of separation, not increasing, but if we can get these two aircraft who are going completely different transition fixes on the Glada, it'll work to our advantage. R1, R4 request control. Spirit Wings 935, our control. Spirit Wings 935, clear direct Furna. That's going to get them going to the northwest. R1, R5, R2, request control, or correction, R4, request control. Iberia 380, your control. Iberia 380, clear direct Kika. Look at that. We are now able to achieve some lateral separation right off the bat, recognizing that there is an overtake situation. And since we have nothing else to do, that's a little tongue-in-cheek, we're busy keeping this sector under control, but we reach out. We call our friends across the aisle, use good phraseology, and coordinate, and boom. Now we have a little course divergence there, and watching that get realized, because as Iberia is picking up speed, you see there, only 20 knots behind, but still 2,000 feet below the Spirit Wings. What we have on our side is there's a divergence there, and it's being realized. FedEx and the Hotel Juliet are being overtaken as they're both on course to FECO. And we also scan and realize that we have to take a handoff on Private Orange 18. Mind you all, this is also taking place when you're still giving frequency changes. It'll be excellent practice. Feel free to replay this and pause this and practice all you like. There you go. We're coming up on 5 miles using our separation list for the 1 Hotel Juliet and the FedEx 64. And we're going to use a nuke pair, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if exactly what we're going to do. We might measure it, but let's take a look here. Let's see what we're working with here. It worked out nicely. You can look at the 2-minute vector length and realize that they are going to be more than 5 miles apart. We have realized it. Hotel Juliet, FedEx 64 are both going to get flight level 340 in this scenario, and we don't have to watch it anymore. We look at Private Orange 18, and we took a handoff on Caribbean Lines 613, and we realized 237s. We're looking at a Galaxy and a MAX 8, a 60 knot overtake. Also bonus points if you could remember that the aircraft we just handed off that is transitioning over Dongku now is our Delta, a 757. Wouldn't hurt to give a little traffic advisory or merging target procedure. And since we don't really have anything else to do and this scenario is just about over, let's practice that. Private Orange 18, traffic 1 o'clock, 12 miles northbound, Boeing 757, flight level 360. We're not talking to the Delta no more, so that's up to Miami to make a good judgment call on that merging target or traffic advisory. You see how we were able to quickly solve the Iberia and the Spirit Wings situation. Everybody's on course and happy. Maybe get some estimate information. Spirit Wings 935, when able to say estimate for Furna, Mach number and altitude request. Iberia 380, when able to say estimate for Kika, Mach number request. Get rid of Islandways and JetBlue 787, getting rid of all these people that we have so wonderfully administered good ATC service to. Islandways 2581, contact San Juan Center 118.15. JetBlue 787, contact San Juan Center 118.15. We get the handoff ready for both our KVOC and our United. You see how quickly that situation developed. And it's also case in point how quickly we needed to solve it. It was a matter of urgency to get control for that aircraft to a descent because we may not have had enough time to solve it once those aircraft were in our jurisdiction. That is another point of good scanning, is determining your priorities. What exactly do I have to do? What can I do that I actually have control over, that I have jurisdiction and the right to do? And then what do I need to do that also requires approval from somebody else? That is certainly a question you're going to ask yourself. And when is that crucial decision going to be made? Can I afford to wait? Can I wait until they're in my airspace so I don't have to bother some other busy coworker? Or do I need to do it now because perhaps they're busy, they didn't recognize the instance, and let me take care of it? And you'll find that happy balance. Same thing with Miami. Now naturally, they have ERAM, and they probably would have been advised of an alert, but we could pretend that they disregarded it, but we saw it, and we took care of it simply by using their airspace with our aircraft on frequency. Same thing with R1 and R5. Maybe they just did not realize that when those aircraft were climbing out on departure, that the A350 was going to catch up to the Airbus A321 on the Glada, because normally we know that those aircraft would be on the same course for a very long time. They would be flying on the same course northbound. And look, we were nice enough to give traffic between kind of just making that point there. I think we pulled up the wrong one though. It's Private Orange and is at 34, not 36. But those aircraft are gone. Iberia and Spirit are happy on their way. We're scanning and we're talking about it. FedEx and One Hotel Juliet are doing just fine. We have Coast Guard 510 Bravo at 38. Taking a look there, just what we're dealing with there. A Citation Mustang, another very light jet, and look, a Citation 750. Coming our way, not in handoff status yet, but this is always good too. You want to see exactly what are we dealing with. And this is one of those instances where they have lateral separation. 5 Sierra X-ray is climbing to 38. Same thing with the Citation. But if we continue to realize that they have lateral separation, and even though they're slowly converging on SAPO, this is one of those instances where we do not have to involve R2. We can solve this issue if it's not solved already in our airspace. And again, getting rid of aircraft, United 2353, contact SAM1 Center 118.75. R2 is descending, JetBlue 787 in the Jazz. And again, even though we took the handoff on 5 Sierra X-ray, we realize that even though that situation is certainly worth a look, it is certainly worth a double check saying, oh my goodness, I have a Citation 750 going 160 knots faster than the Citation Mustang, who's climbing, but does it actually require any intervention? And I would argue that it does not. We ran out the vector length and we saw that the overtake will probably be complete somewhere north of Pling, and it'll all be okay. You see how we used direct to our advantage, or not quite direct to our advantage yet, but we had the Caribbean slowly overtaking the Galaxy, both at 37. And if you know that D8 is going to probably coordinate one of those aircraft at a different altitude because they do not have the required non-radar separation to leave our airspace over to Piarco. Our Coney departures are doing just fine. They're almost leveled off. And the Citation Mustang and the Citation 750 situation is slowly resolving itself. It's interesting to see and to note how they are slowly converging, but that Citation, a tale of two Citations, that Citation 750 is just so tremendously faster than the Citation Mustang. And that's exactly what this scenario designed to do. And as you see there, case in point, remember we said that if we were to not intervene between the Spirit and the Iberia, they would have been on the same course to Mali and then eventually go off to their respective transitions. But we took care of that, and you see how using direct to your advantage helps you resolve conflicts. Makes everybody happy. It certainly makes the aircrew happy. And not that you're only in the business to make aircraft happy, but there is a certain element of this job that is customer satisfaction. Private Orange and Caribbean, we're letting that situation ride, taking care of it within our airspace. There's really no need to get too far involved. And looks like we were able to resolve it, perhaps asking Caribbean 613 if they're able to fly level 390. Looks like they were able to. And that's great because they've been flying since Toronto, I believe. And they're probably light enough to take that altitude. Probably good to ride up there. And there it is. We expanded our airspace. We did not contract it. And we were able to provide a service there. RA takes the handoff on the KVOC. Miami 62 looks like they took a handoff on FedEx. Things are working out great here. Our workload is lessening. We've introduced some aircraft to the sector, i.e. the 5 Sierra X-ray and Coast Guard 510 Bravo, but we've gotten rid of a lot of things, and we've solved a lot of things. We've done actually very, very good work in this session. And Carolines is climbing. All in all, a good day's work. I hope you realize some of the things that we were able to do. We made full use of our airspace. We made full use of the embedded and inherent MEARTS functions when it came to using halos, the separation list, zooming in and out, not fixating on any one particular instance for too long, scanning for conflicts, coming back to them, realizing what we can fix in our airspace and what we can't. You get the thumbs up. You did a fantastic job. Very proud of you. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit with us and talk about all things scanning and all things 7110.65 with that ultimate goal in mind to arm you to the teeth with all the tools required to not only detect conflicts but also resolve them. And you saw how we were able to do that today as we walked through a relatively basic scenario. It wasn't the busiest, but it certainly was chock full of conflicts. Conflicts that you were able to identify and reconcile right away, utilizing decision support tools, utilizing proper phraseology, proper procedures. If that meant requesting control from adjacent sectors or adjacent facilities, vectoring, putting up a halo, putting aircraft in the separation list, using direct to your advantage, doing some vectoring, keeping the data block constantly updated, not focusing on any one situation for too long as you move about the display. All of those things are so valuable to incorporate into your scan. Bouncing from one aircraft to another, understanding that things aren't going to be solved in a matter of seconds in the en route environment. Things take a little bit longer. Not every move that you make is going to put forth or manifest instant gratification. It's going to require a little bit of patience, monitoring, and moving from one thing to another. All of these wonderful things I know you have the capability to do in this dynamic environment. That's what makes it so fun. And I hope you see the fun in that today. And I hope you had fun. I know I certainly did. I wish you nothing but the best as you go about your training or perfecting your scan. If you're just a casual onlooker, I hope you found some value in some of this information. And I look forward to hanging out with you again and talking in such a candid fashion about what is one of the ultimate loves in my life, air traffic control, and I hope it certainly is of yours. You be well, and we'll see you next time. Take care.